Jimbo Paris, and you are listening to The Jimbo Paris Show. All right, how's it going, people? Jimbo Paris here. Welcome back to the show. So today we have Katarzyna Peoples. Forgive me if I'm pronouncing that name completely wrong. But she is a very impressive woman. She's, first of all, a university professor. She's a mental health coach. She is kind of the owner of the People's Farm and Rehabilitation Center of Education. So she's done a lot of different things. And she's focused a lot on organizing life-transforming groups. And she's also a certified online therapy director. So she has a lot on her belt, and I definitely want to learn more about her. So let's see what she has to say.
Hey, how are you?
How are you? Did I pronounce your name properly?
It's Katarzyna. I know it's hard. It's Polish for Catherine, but I just go by Kat.
I am so sorry. I should have asked you before this show. Oh my goodness. So
you're fine. You're not alone.
So, Dr. Kat, can you tell me a bit about yourself, who you are, what you're about, what your message is?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have been working with individuals to help them kind of get out of their destructive patterns. I've been working for 23 years. I started in addictions. I've still been working with addictions, all kinds of, from behavioral to chemical addictions. And then everything in between. I do a lot of couples work as well, and getting into like out of toxic relationships into good relationships. But what I do is sort of unique because I'm a researcher also by trade. I have the ability to trace people's patterns pretty accurately in terms of like what's going on now when people have destructive patterns or when people are doing things that aren't working for them, why they do what they do. And usually like within like 5 to 10 minutes of speaking with someone in terms of like their problematic area, I'm able to kind of in my mind trace back generally what their childhood or past has looked like, kind of like where the sticking points have been. Because what we do now, if we haven't worked through those things, is exactly parallel to the things that we developed in the past. Those things, those patterns that we've created in order to adapt to the environments that we were in. And so what I do is help people create new patterns. So the things that are no longer working for them in terms of relationships, addictions, work, anything else, and getting out of those in order to be productive, get into relationships they want, and get out of like that vicious cycle that it feels like I continue to do exactly what I've been doing and it's not working anymore.
Okay, that's interesting. So can you kind of give an example of what an old pattern is that may not be so good and a new pattern that you might instill in someone or change?
Yeah, so they're all different, but I'll give an example of like, say an easy one is like relationships, right? So if the issue is like, I tend to just, like whenever conflict comes up, I'm out, I either leave or I, ghost somebody or I'm not good with conflict. Essentially, like I'm avoiding that. And then things don't get addressed. And so what happens in life is if you don't learn a lesson, it just keeps coming and coming and coming until you learn that lesson, right? So we all know that. And so like that example alone is indicative of I have created a situation where I cope with conflict where it was safe for me to escape. So one simple example, perhaps, and there's many, maybe when I was young, I continually went to my room whenever my parents were fighting because it was so toxic. And I just went to my room to retreat and that felt safe for me. And so what happens is the brain will take that on and say, this is good. This is working because it was something that people, kids do out of survival. But what happens is the brain continues to say, this is safe, this is good, this keeps you alive. And into adulthood, whenever there's any sort of conflict or whatever conflict, it triggers that old feeling of this is unsafe for me. And that's why it feels exceptionally uncomfortable. And what I do is what I've always done in the past that has worked. And so I retreat to my room, right? Metaphorically. So I escape from that situation. And so what I help people do is trace those things back on a feelings level in terms of, yes, this has felt exactly like that. what I do now, this is felt exactly like that back then, because it's not enough just to know. It's not enough to be like, I have abandonment issues and that's why I, have crappy relationships. You can't know it on a cognitive level. You have to feel it and understand it. And it's a tether, is what I like to call it. It's actually a tether that keeps you back doing the same things. And once you're able to understand it and you trace it back on a feelings level, you can reprogram your subconscious, which is what the subconscious deals in, is feelings. It doesn't get reprogrammed through thoughts alone, it's feelings. And that's what drives you. And then you can start to make new patterns.
Wow. So you reprogram the subconscious through feelings. Okay.
Exactly.
I definitely want to get into how a bit later. But what I find interesting too is this idea of the tether. Is this tether something that you would consider the idea of a self-fulfilling prophecy?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's exactly what it is in many senses. So when you don't know why you do what you do, you act on feeling. Okay. And so what happens in this present moment, so going back to this example of like, there's a conflict and I run away from whatever's uncomfortable. So that's the tether, right? So what happens is if I don't know why I do what I do, I continue to do what I've always done to keep myself safe, because your brain that's what it's designed to do. It's like a survival system, right? The tether is the self-fulfilling prophecy, because I have certain messages about life that I have. I have certain understandings. People will abandon me. People will hurt me. Conflict is difficult. I need to run, right? And so what happens is yes, you do run, but also because of the messages that you carry in terms of what you've gotten throughout childhood and growing up about who people are, right? People will hurt me if I engage with them in conflict, and so I'm going to run away. And so what happens with the self-fulfilling prophecy is like a other piece of that is I will react to people in a certain way, or I will engage with people in a certain way because I expect certain things from them. I expect that they will hurt me, in essence, right? In one way or another, or abandon me or whatever. And so what happens is I end up having these negative thoughts that I carry, and people respond to that. But yeah, the self-fulfilling prophecy is because I expect this from you, I will act a certain way in order to protect myself. But when we act certain ways, say when we're aloof, right? People react to us differently than when we're engaging, right? When we lead with our feelings, people engage with us different ways than when we lead with our thoughts. And so that the way that you carry yourself, because of the messages also that you have, and then these tethers that get triggered, these feelings that get triggered from the tethers, create the self-fulfilling prophecy, which is why you end up creating that same pattern and attracting the same people and those sorts of things. So it's all connected in like one system.
Okay. So I think the next question I have is, okay, we have these self-fulfilling prophecies, we have these old patterns, but then we have the new patterns too. How do we fix these issues? And I think this is when we start getting into Dr. Kat and her expertise, if you will.
Yeah. So that's always the question, right? So it's like, it's not enough just to know. First of all, there's power in knowing. So that's actually the first step is, like I said, reprogram the subconscious. You have to deal it on the feelings level. So when you're back to the example of running away, what you need to do is trace it back. It's like, when have I felt like this before? Okay. When have I felt like this before? And being able to trace that. And then once you're able to trace that and ground it in a feeling, your subconscious gets a message that, oh, yes, this is linked to this. And you're able to actually hold that cognitively. Okay. You're able to actually have control now over the feeling. That doesn't mean the feeling goes away necessarily, but it doesn't feel out of control because now you know that it's an old feeling. Okay, so you know that, oh, I'm being triggered in this present moment. This person is not actually making me feel this certain way. And that's a lot of our present adult lives, is we are triggered rather than actually reacting to our current present situation. And then we react to the old feeling by pushing it down. And how do we do that? We do that through doing what we've always done, retreating to our room or whatever it is. Insert destructive pattern here, right? Lashing out, blaming, or whatever. And so how you change that, first of all, is tracing it. And then second of all, is then you can cognitively hold it. So what happens is you actually create a space Between you get triggered to the reaction, you actually create a space, a cognitive space where you can do something different. You're allowing yourself now to do something different because you're able to understand it and hold it cognitively, kind of like putting it on a shelf where it belongs. And now knowing like, oh, wait a minute, I'm not reacting to this person isn't actually creating this feeling within me. And so it's within that second that you have realized that, but the work that you've done before, that you can do something different. And it doesn't have to necessarily be the right thing. It can just be something different so that you can start to break that pattern. And then once you start to break that pattern, what happens is you end up getting new consequences, right? People start reacting to you differently than they have before. And the more that you continue to do that, and you end up finding out people can emotionally hold me, people are okay and safe, people can love me. It starts to filter into your limbic system and starts to filter into that default system that you've created with your subconscious of keeping you alive, doing what you've always done. And then it starts to be more and more natural to be able to open up to others, to be able to be vulnerable to others, or whatever it is that you're avoiding. And so it's through the programming also of getting different consequences and then getting new information that you're also incorporating that. I like to call it like that default system where you've done what you've always done, that you're actually able to change it. And then eventually, first it'll work against you. It's like, oh, wait, this is uncomfortable. But eventually, as you continue to get new consequences and your brain starts to make the assertion that you're safe, you create a new default system. You create a new personality. And that's how you start and continue to change, is by first understanding that tether, creating that space, and then doing new behaviors, getting new information. And then all of a sudden your personality starts changing then from what it's always been. It's not as guarded. You're not escaping. You're not doing those things that don't work for you anymore.
Okay. Yeah, that's all very interesting, and it kind of explains the internet quite a bit. People tend to just react to things almost instantly, and it's good to know that a lot of this it has nothing to do usually with the content, but it has a lot more to do with the people. And I think this is a big issue you're definitely addressing. And what is depression? What happens if it's untreated?
Yeah, so depression is in many cases like an absence of meaning and an absence of purpose, right? So like when you inauthentic self, but it's a symptom. It's a symptom of empty space in your life. Yeah, you can create unhealthy barriers, right? You can cut people off. Like life's always a balance, right? It's like nothing's good or bad in itself. And what I mean by that is like barriers, like we talk about barriers or boundaries. There's good boundaries, spaces, and there's also bad boundaries, like cutting people out. So yeah, if you're isolating yourself within the depths of like depression, that's severely unbalanced. But that's a moving away from, I don't want to deal with this, whatever that is, the absence of like that, but it's an absence of meaning in your life. And so you want to create boundaries where you're always moving towards authentically you. And so you're creating spaces with people that don't serve that, like I need to maybe create this much of a space or have this sort of engagement with you because I'm not able to fully be me. But you don't want to go on the continuum of I'm going to cut people out of my life because I don't want to deal with whatever it is in my life. It's, like it's a meaninglessness. It's a lack of purpose. Like that's depression too, right? It's being away from being authentically you. And a lot of that has to do especially with depressions, people don't see you. So it's very, very sad when nobody knows who you are. And a lot of people have that experience, probably more people than not.
And I'm just curious too, when we talk about depression, I think I asked you about how it kind of affects, how people may operate on the internet. But when it comes to that, how can it impact mental illnesses and disorders? And are there any kind of mental illnesses or disorders? Again, you're a PhD, you may know this, but that can be kind of connected to depression.
Mental illness and disorders, so there's all kinds, but there's depression, which is like axis 1. So that's like the depression, anxiety, like the mental health stuff. Then there's axis 2, which is personality disorders. Okay. And so that's like, big on the internet and YouTube now is like narcissistic personality disorder, right? There's like a whole following with that, right? That's in cluster B. And that goes with like social, that goes with histrionic and borderline, those things, but they're all essentially the same in that cluster B. So those two things are different. So there's the mental health, which is like that we classically define as mental health, and there's a lot of like pills for that, right? So there's a lot of like, for depression, anxiety, there's schizophrenia, all of those things. And then the axis 2, which is the personality disorders, those are like how personalities are formed through these destructive patterns. Those are forms of control, but they're interrelated as well. So with depression and all of that, though, as you're moving through the healing journey, is that when you create meaning in your life, that depression is no longer a symptom of that. Okay. So like, that's the thing too, is like, we are trained and programmed to think that they are these purely like chemical things, like you just have depression, but that's not true. You can actually trace everybody's patterns of depression. When are you depressed? What does it look like when you're depressed? What are you doing? What's happening in your life? And they will always be patterns of similar behavior. And whenever you're able to understand those and then do things that are counterintuitive of, from those destructions in the other direction, you're actually able to alleviate the depression. And like I said, all of that's linked to like purpose and meaning and authenticity. And that also goes with like those more complex mental health disorders. Like, I've worked with people that have had like auditory hallucinations, visual, all of that sort of things. And those are also linked to, we don't think of it. We think of like, oh, this is just something chemical, but it really isn't. It's a disassociation from self. And that happens through trauma, but essentially it happens through coping mechanisms. Like I said, it's still another form of destructive pattern. So I've actually helped people work through getting rid of like hallucinations, dissociations, and all of that through this alignment process. So it's all like connected. I don't know if that answers your question or not. I think that's like a long answer to your short question, but it's all in the same boat, but different techniques to be able to sort of heal those things depending on how one is tracing it and understanding it. So you really have to understand your situation.
And that's interesting. And can you tell us a bit more about your business and work?
I know I do a lot of things, as you mentioned in the intro. So, but in terms of what we're talking about here, what I do is I work with individuals mainly in groups. And so I have these 6-month groups, cohort groups that I work with. I have two kinds. I work with counselors as well in terms of doing the work and bringing clients in and learning how to do the work. And then the other group, in terms of what we're talking about here, is helping people get out of destructive patterns and create the lives that they want. And so what I do is I start with one group and I end with the same group. So like I said, it's a cohort model. So the same people that start are the same people that end, and they go through that growth process together. And then I'll do some individuals and those sorts of things. But everything that we've talked about here is I'll help people trace those destructive patterns. We'll go look at those tethers. We'll do alignment work in terms of who do you want to be? What is the life that you want to have? Because at the end of the journey, and these are all 6-month groups, at the end of the journey, people do not align with that old self anymore. And so even if they're healing still some tethers, they're able to do those things and continue to do those things, but they're not aligning with that old self anymore. So they don't really have the desires that they started with. They don't have those destructive patterns that they started with. They're moving beyond. And so that's how I work with people. And the reason the group is so powerful is because not only are you able to see other people's journey, but you're also able to relate to them. And also like within that relational piece, that social psychology piece of like how we relate, like through feelings, is like the power of that group to be able to do that, to be able to like really have other people see you, and that happens more so in the group dynamic of people that struggle within the same patterns or similar patterns, and they're able to do that work together. It's just such a powerful process. So that's the work that I do in terms of clients that want to do destructive pattern work, and also working with counselors to be able to help them do that. And by 6 months, it's usually, like I said, a 6-month process, which is really great too, because people think well, it took me 20 years to get here. It took me 40 years to get here. It's going to take me 40 years to get out. It's going to take me, 20 years to get out. And that's just not true. The brain is so highly programmable that if you have a really, skilled clinician that can help you in that process, you can reprogram it in a short amount of time and be able to completely change your life, in much less time than you think. That's a lot of the work that we do too, is in terms of like neuroplasticity and all of that. Like, how does the brain work? So in terms of like addictions, well, the model that we still have of addictions, like once an addict, always an addict. Everyone's heard that, right? But it's not the way the brain works. The brain doesn't work like that. The brain's highly programmable. So you are not an addict. However, because you are firing and refiring a lot of the same neural pathways or similar ones whenever you create an addiction, if you go back to that behavior, it won't take you as long to get to that end state that you were at than before, because your brain remembers everything. But the thing is that when you no longer align and we can take away that desire for that chemical or behavior, which is what happens in the alignment work and the reprogramming work, you can't identify as an addict anymore. And actually works against you, because if you're identifying as an addict, if you're identifying that this is who I'll always be, then actually that's always what you'll bring as well. So it works against you to keep that identity as well. So it's not a matter of denial. It's a matter of knowing who you are and knowing what your process is, but aligning with a new self, aligning with a new identity, that you want to be, rather than sticking to what you think you're stuck to. I'll always be an addict. And it's the same thing with like anything else. Like, I'm just bad at relationships, or I'm a terrible husband, or, I'll never be a great mom. Like, whatever it is, it's like, okay, well, here you go then. Like, that's what happens, is like you get more of that. That's the way that it works as well. So a big part of that too, in terms of like reprogramming and aligning with a new self, is you have to do that. You have to do that in order to take those desires and destructive patterns away. Because if you're always aligning with those things, then you'll continue to be in that space. The self-fulfilling prophecy, as we talked about in the beginning. So it's a lot of that. So that's the work that I do, which is extremely, extremely powerful. And I have, and I'm always writing things. It's like a blog, on my email list that comes out once a week, in terms of like neuroplasticity work, and like I do a lot of like quantum physics stuff, and then I do a lot of philosophy stuff and psychology things, things to read about, steps to take in order to like, start on these journeys as well. And people just hop on my blog, and I also have like a guidebook that's free in terms of starting that process of starting to understand what your destructive patterns are. So if you go on my website, drkatpeoples.com, there's like a free guidebook. People can sign up for that and just kind of get that process started of like, I wonder what my destructive patterns are, like how to identify them, and starting that, like that tether work. And then, you can kind of get all of my other information and be on the email with that. Yeah, there I am. So yeah, it's the second option. So right after home, you can get that free guidebook.
And this is an interesting thing. Can you kind of show us a bit of your website and kind of explain a bit how you ask for feedback from your clients that you coach?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So the website is, like when people want to start working with me. And like I said, I only work with groups now. So I still have some individual clients here and there, but mainly this is really the powerful work is within groups, and then doing some of the individual work here. And so the free guidebook takes you to, like, starting that process, and then you'll get on my email list and like kind of getting that information. And I'm in like pretty high contact with my email community. So anytime people respond back or have a question or anything, they can get me all the time. So I'm very active on my email. And then in terms of feedback, I get feedback from my groups every month in terms of like how it's going, what needs to be, what they feel needs to be changed, what's working for them. And then also like within just working, we do like a lot of feedback and change a lot of things that need to be done. So there's a lot of that goes on. And then people can work with me individually, but usually, like I said, the individuals in the group work now is like mainly what I do. And then I will be posting also, I have like a bunch of like reviews that I haven't posted on my website in terms of like people's experiences. But I would say, just to highlight for you in terms of working with me, I think the biggest feedback I get is that, people are pretty like blown away in terms of realizing the things that they do, they didn't even realize that they did. and then how incredibly healing that is to be able to like change those things, and the short amount of time that it takes, I mean, in terms of like your lifespan, right? Or however long it took to get here, it does not have to take that long to get out of it. And that's the thing too, like if you're not with someone that's, pretty skilled at it, like you can spend like 5-10 years in therapy, just kind of like spinning your wheels, in terms of that. And you don't have to spend all of that time. Like it's not necessary. It's great to get like tweaked, it's great to get tweaked. So like I said, when I work with individuals, most of the people that I work with is people I've worked with in the past, and it's like a year from now. They're like, hey, Dr. Peoples, can you see me for a session, and we'll kind of do like a tune-up, in terms of like, I'm doing great, this, and that. And that's really, in like 23 years, I always have like people coming back, just doing like an individual session here or there, just to kind of get them back on track, or like doing some new realizations and all of that. But if you're starting the journey, like the power of the group and doing that like intensive work, which is quite pleasant, actually, a lot of it's quite pleasant in terms of like, it's not doom and gloom. It's a lot of like really great spiritual growth and just amazing, powerful work. That's really your sweet spot. That's where you want to be in terms of like getting that activated and getting where you want to be in 6 months, and continuing that journey. Like, so yeah, so that's the work I do.
And what advice would you give to anyone?
This is what I tell people. I don't know if it's classified as advice, but I'll add that as well. So the most important thing to know is that there's nothing wrong with you. Okay. So people hold on to that there's something inherently wrong with them. And that's just not true. Okay. There's nothing wrong with anybody. So you're doing things, like I mentioned before, that do not work for you. And so the advice that's linked to that, I would say, is you have to know who you are. You have to know those things. You have to delve into why you do what you do to start that journey and to be able to create a life that you want. And so that's really the first thing, is know who you are, and that's the first step in starting to accept yourself. As you continue to find out who you are, is incorporating those things that you've been running away from, those things that you've been escaping through addictions and destructive patterns. Those things work for you as well. You're just not using them well enough. They're out of balance. Anger is not a bad thing, right? But you got to balance it to assertiveness, right? Like, you don't want people stepping all over your boundaries and being, because you're too afraid to say anything, right? You want to move on the other direction. So it's a matter of like, you're out of balance, but there's nothing wrong with you. And it's just a matter of working through that. And you have to start doing that through really doing that tether work, really understanding who you are. So that would be my advice, is like step one is start there. Start at those destructive patterns and start to look at those. And you can only do that effectively through feelings. So you have to do the feelings work. You have to feel it, which is why it has to be specific. It's not enough just to know I had a bad childhood and therefore, we all know that, right? That's why it doesn't work. So it's within the feelings that the reprogramming of the subconscious happens. And that's your system for changing your life. That's where all the magic happens. And so right now it may be working against you in a lot of ways. And those are the things that you want to reprogram. And the things that are working great, you keep those.
Okay, good.
And that would be my advice.
So I think the final thing I want to ask is, how can we reach you? This has been an amazing, in-depth interview here. I think there's a lot of great gems here. But yeah, how can people find you, reach out to you?
So on my website is all my contact information. So if you go into drkatpeoples.com, there's a contact menu item, and my phone number is there. There's also a contact sheet that you can email me from there. People can pretty much Google me and find me. It's pretty easy to find me. But my email, I believe, is also on my website. But if you want to email me directly, it's the website goes the same place. It's at drkatpeoples.com, drkatpeoples.com. And I answer every email that I get back. So if anybody has a question or, wants to work with me or is interested in the upcoming group cohort, wants to get on the email list or whatever it is, definitely contact me, and I'll be probably starting the next cohort. I just filled this one. It'll be probably about in the next month or so. I'll be starting to send out emails and filling that one up. Yeah, so that's all the, and if you forgot all that contact information, just Google Kat Peoples, Dr. Kat Peoples, and you'll find me, and all of my information's linked to everything else.
Well, thank you for being on the show, Dr. Kat. It really has been a privilege. And,
thanks for having me.
Of course. And yeah, thanks again for watching, everyone. I'm Jimbo Paris. This is the Jimbo Paris Show. I will see you next time. I'm currently working on a passion project that I'm really excited about, but I need your help to bring it to life. We will be launching soon our very own Jimbo Paris Academy, and this is going to be about aspiring creators and creating concepts. Thank you for your support. I'm sharing free bonus content to supporters, so let's make some amazing content together. Our affiliate partner, LifeWork Systems, focused on helping create a better collegial environment, looking at the mental health of business workers, business employees, and overall bringing the business up. Thank you for listening to the Jimbo Paris Show.